Three major warnings, and then I'm going to talk about the news. And this is one of those videos that puts me on the razor's edge of cancellation, but I don't care. Time is of the essence. Warning number one. There's a plan, and you and I most certainly cannot 100% ascertain what that plan is. All we can do is speculate, but there is a plan. It may not be one that extends 10, 20 years into the future, but most definitely they got it covered for this year. Case in point, Specimen A. June 2021. Joe Biden meets with Vladimir Putin in Geneva, Switzerland for the USA-Russia summit. Now, at the time, tensions were high. However, there appeared to be a slight rapprochement between the Russians and the Americans around the topic of Ukraine. There appeared to be the beginnings, or what some people thought, this showed promise for the beginning of harmonious relations around that issue. And then, of course, the meeting ended and Biden ran his mouth. 2 months later, we see the most abrupt and quite possibly reckless abandonment of a country after one of the longest military interventions in modern history. I'm talking about Afghanistan. We've seen what was some of the most dramatic scenes that were never before seen in the history of war. People clinging to airplanes, plunging to their deaths because they could not escape. We've never seen such a dramatic exit in a war, ever. Like hard stop. And that was 2 months after Biden met with Vladimir Putin. Now, there's an old saying, you can't win a war on two fronts. Fast forward a little bit to November of 2021, Russia shoots down one of its own satellites. And I remember where I was when I heard this news. I was sitting in my truck, and it was snowing, but it was this weird sleet kind of snow. And I just remember I had a really bad feeling that something was about to pop off. And I made a video about it. 3 months go by, and of course, our sources are telling us, because they're flying weapons shipments to Ukraine on a daily basis, that this is it. Okay, they're about to go to war with the Russians by proxy in Ukraine. And this was in about a month in the run-up to this, and this is why the channel kind of blew up around that time, is because we essentially were very certain that this was going to happen, and sure enough, it did. And even when there were doubts, mostly ado with the Russians' supposed pullback and retreat from the front lines at the beginning of the conflict, when they said that it was just an exercise, and we said it wasn't, and then lo and behold, 72 hours later, the war started. In fact, we called it to the hour, which was why the channel blew up. Anyways, we see here a classic example of how they knew that that war was about to start. Now, you can say that they knew this war was coming since 2014. Many people, like Joel Skousen, he was predicting it probably since the early 2010s. He actually said the exact date that it was going to happen. He said it was going to be around like just after 2020, okay? So people had predicted this, but look at the timeline of events. This tells you that the government knew exactly what they were going to do, at least in the very least 6 months in advance of it happening. Now, I don't put a whole lot of stock in this government's capability for foresight. I think they're largely reactionary, but I will give them 6 months to a year. I think they have a plan, and they can maybe think a couple moves ahead. That's all this government can do. And not just this government, pretty much any government birthed from the system that we have now. So they have a plan for what they're going to be doing in the next 6 months to a year, okay? Now, let's fast forward a little bit. Last September, I bring on a guest who is the owner of one of the biggest freeze-dry companies in the United States. And they provide food to the military. And they tell us that basically military contracts are through the roof. This is before October 7th, okay? Through the roof. And that rumor on the street was at the time that a lot of this is going to the Navy, a lot of it's going to continuity of government, also to U.S. embassies for their own continuity of government and sustaining provisions during wartime, okay? And that these orders were off the charts, like nothing ever seen before. October 7th comes around, of course. And in the run-up to that, actually, let's backtrack a little bit more. Because prior to that, there were rumblings that there might be a government shutdown. And they just barely were able to avert a government shutdown. And I think I had mentioned at the time, unless there was some black swan event, there will be a government shutdown. And lo and behold, there was this black swan event, okay? And this is at the time when the United States is starting to wane in its support, or at least bipartisan support for Ukraine. And again, going back to the Afghanistan example, we know what happens when that starts to happen. That means that the war is about to go somewhere else, or the focus is about to go somewhere else, which does not mean they're going to be doing a full retreat from Ukraine at all. They're working on that. They have a plan for how they're going to maintain both theaters. I'll get to that in just a moment. So what we start to see then is we start to see the ramping up of conflict in the Middle East. And in the meantime, the winding down of, or the very surreptitious receding interest in support for Ukraine. And all of a sudden, NATO just completely went silent. They're the propaganda wing of Ukraine and Nato. And but they're coming back now, you'll notice. But so anyways, right now, in the last 24 hours, things have gone very quiet across the front, with the exception of the Houthis, which we'll get to in a moment. And I'm talking, of course, between Lebanon and Israel. Israel has withdrawn a lot of their forces from the Gaza Strip. They claim that they were victorious, yet there's still videos coming out of, the subterranean warfare was just decimating their army, apparently, and nothing that they're going to publicly admit to. So they're taking these brigades out, moving them to the north. Yesterday, they put the northern hospitals on high alert, get ready to expect mass casualty events. They start arming all of the civilians in the north, and now there are road blockades into Galilee and various places along the towards the Golan Heights and towards the north, towards the northern Lebanese border. And whenever there's a period of silence like this for no apparent reason, usually that's because a more strategic plan is being prepared to be executed. So when you have fighting going on, that means you're in the thick of a battle, right? And then when there's a calm, a lot of people presume that that means that tensions are winding down, when really it's just planning the next big move, which is going to be the war with Lebanon, okay? Now, yesterday, the U.S. shot down, we're still on warning number 1. I got 2 more of these bangers, all right? Yesterday, the U.S. shot down 24 Houthi missiles. Now, with that attritional rate, how long can they possibly sustain themselves without resupply? Some people will say not long. Some people will say that the logistic mechanism is there in order to resupply these warships. I had a theory that perhaps the U.S. is calibrating its defenses because we know that the Houthis are utilizing an arsenal which is very similar to the ones that the Iranians would use, although they're not using nearly the best of what Iran has. Nonetheless, it's an opportunity for the U.S. Navy to train and then possibly just be a victim of a warship attack, which would immediately compel the support of the American people, at least half of them anyways, towards attacking Yemen again. And remember, they tried that for years and years, and all it did was make Yemen stronger. So now, just tonight, we have the UN Security Council approving a resolution calling for the halt to Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. So this is going to provide them with the optics that they need to make their move. Now, how does the Houthi situation relate to the Lebanon situation. Remember, we got to think of the timeline. They had a plan all along. And if you can tell, looking by a lot of the snakes involved, there's a plan here, okay? Maybe it's something to do with Lloyd Austin's health, the reason why they're stalling. I don't know. Some people think that there's that whole fiasco. There's so many fiascos going on. You got the Epstein, you got the Biden, you got and they're really, are these just all diversions, to be really honest? I don't like using that because I feel like it's an analytical cop-out to say, oh, it's just a diversion. Anyways, what I think is happening right now is that they're well aware of the fact that once they engage the Houthis in an aggressive, offensive manner, the whole region is going to flare up. And it's quite possible that the Israelis are not prepared yet. And they also know, conversely, once the Israelis go to war with Lebanon, the whole region's going to go up. So if they're not fully prepared at that point in time to engage the Houthis, then shit's going to hit the fan. Now, everybody's talking about how this shipping embargo, which is pretty much what it is affecting Israel and is affecting global shipping prices, which it is. You have shipping rates skyrocketing, especially throughout that region. You have almost the traffic there has been cut in half. And the other person who is suffering from this, or the other nation state, is, of course, Egypt, because they manage the Suez Canal. So they're losing lots of revenue. A friend of mine posed to me the possibility that perhaps this is the Americans and this coalition's way of trying to get Egypt to play ball with Israel and take the Palestinians in as refugees. That's possible because, remember, Egypt has a massive army, and it's quite likely that without the nuclear capabilities of Israel, some people might say they have a big enough army to roll over into Israel. I mean, they have the population, they have the military size, and Israel's a small country, right? Without nuclear weapons, they're done. And especially if you got all of those other countries breathing down their neck as well. They are effectively fighting a war on 7 fronts, and if you put Egypt in there, well, that's 8, okay? So, and they have a massive army. So there's something going on. There is a plan within this region, and it's very likely that when it erupts, it's all going to go at the exact same time. That is why they haven't made their move on the Houthis yet. There's a lot of OSINT grifters who are just, chomping at the bit, hoping that Biden will give the green light, or whoever's in charge over there will give the green light for them to start attacking Yemen, as if that's going to solve anything. At this point, they realize, they know, people who are above these propagandist pay grade understand what the implications of that would be, which is why they're not doing it. If it was that easy, they would do it. If it was as easy as just attacking Yemen and nothing bad would happen, don't you think they would do that? So there's a much bigger picture being played here. And this is something to understand, that we are not privy to what that plan is. But if you go back in time throughout the news archives, and I'm giving away industry secrets here, but a great way to do analysis of these types of events, because we so easily, people forget that Israel and the United States were just running anti-Iranian nuclear exercises last year, in anticipation of the JCPOA falling apart, which it did. Okay, now that's completely scrapped. So, and then you also have all of these other things that have happened throughout the timeline that people have forgotten about. House Resolution 559, a couple months old now. People have forgotten about it entirely. It's a great time to start, making a material move in that direction. A move with materiel, I should say. So this is a great way to really try to understand the long plays, is to go back and to do custom searches in the news for various time periods that precede these major events. And that will shed light on, where it is that they were planning this, or that they were making preparations for this because they knew it was about to happen. We have around 50 elections, major elections, in major countries that's going to lead to political upheaval across the board in 2024. And it's not just the United States, it's countries all around the world, big players, okay? So this is not only a year of potential world war, but also civil war, or in the very least, civil unrest. Now, I think I'm going to do warning number 3 before I do warning number 2. And actually, this warning is attached to warning number 1. Vladimir Zelensky, it occurred to me, and as it's occurred to a lot of people, this guy seems to just gallivant around the world during a so-called war without any threat from the Russians. He's visiting the Baltic states right now, which are in spitting distance from St. Petersburg and Moscow and the Russian border. And this is a guy who they're supposedly supposed to be at war with, and yet he is free to do this international diplomatic gallivant and ask for weapons. And that's all he's doing, right? So it's become quite evident to me that there's some unspoken rule of thumb here. There's some agreement, perhaps, that Nato has with Russia, that if he takes out Zelensky, that's a red line. And by red line, I mean, and you know how they say, well, Ukraine's not in Article 5. Why is this guy just willy-nilly flying around on jets? I mean, what would, if Russia knew, if this was really an existential war for them, right? And this guy is going around to get the weapons and the funding to kill more Russians and to invade, Russians' land in the Belgorod region, and to attack Moscow with drones, and calling for the destruction of the society and the ouster of Vladimir Putin. Why on earth would you just let this guy run around unless he was under the nuclear umbrella already, which is major? Some people will say, well, that's obvious, isn't it? No, it isn't. It's not obvious at all. He's not supposed to be. He's not in NATO. They don't have Article 5. But this supports Ray McGovern's thesis, the retired CIA analyst, well-respected of 27 years, that the USA may give Ukraine nuclear weapons. The craziest thought. But the craziest thing is that this guy is running around without recourse. Now you have this Ukrainian propagandist, Dmitry Gordon. He comes out today and he says the following, apparently very popular in the mix. Gordon promises to leave no stone unturned from Russia. There will be no civilians left in Belgorod. Only ruins will remain of Belgorod. Belgorod will become Bakhmut. But this is just the first sign. The same story will happen in Moscow. We already have something to perform the task. This is an English translation, so it's not exact. And in Kursk, and in Voronezh, and in Ryazan, and so on, and then the Urals. We have enough to fly somewhere. I say that it will happen. Russia will leave no stone unturned. We will decide the fate of our territories, not on the line of contact on the front, but on the territory of Russia. This is where the fate of this war will be decided. So they are getting ready to go all in on their attacks in Russia. And if they start utilizing, because they've already started using the American weapons and all the other weapons they've been getting to attack Russia. That wasn't supposed to happen before. They could use the old Soviet era stuff if they wanted to do these Belgorod incursions, but they weren't supposed to use the American equipment. Now they're already doing that. And if they're about to get F-16s, this guy is saying that they're going to bring the war to Russia. Okay? Now, the Swedes are about to get into NATO. They're going to be doing a vote, I think, in 2 weeks. They've already pledged that they're going to move troops immediately to the Baltics. Why the rush? And here we have the Swedish prime minister, or the Swedish commander of their military forces, advising the population, and maybe not as explicitly as some people would like. It's not like he comes on the national television and says, okay, it's an emergency situation. But he advised in a press conference or something that everybody in the country has to get prepared for war. The same thing we've heard now from damn near every single European country. Every other week, it's another country saying we got to prepare. One day it's the UK, next day it's Austria, and on, so forth down the line. So something big is coming there, guys. These guys are going for broke. And right now in Moscow, it is burning. They're dealing with power outages. They're constantly seeing sabotage. They're currently dealing with a record cold snap, unlike anything they've probably seen in some time. And not good. Not good. Now, warning number 2, okay? I made a post on one social media platform that I frequent, and it was basically the following. Only the IDF in Ukraine are putting women near the front line. Now you have to ask yourself, Western countries putting our women near the front line. I'm not sexist. I'm an equal opportunities person. But understand that this isn't your Rosie the Riveter World War II, we can do it type approach. These women are actually being put in positions where they could potentially be killed. Okay, they have firearms. They're not maybe doing the more, really aggressive frontline stuff, but they're there as medics or support staff or what have you. I believe that this is the final stage of Western dehumanization. Let me explain. When chivalry dies, nothing is sacred, not even the bearers of life. I do believe that sending women to war is in a way, it's like a statement that we don't even care about the future anymore because women are the bearers of life. Until we have artificial wombs and you can do some stuff in a lab, you need women in order to procreate. And the birth rates in Ukraine are already well below replenishment levels even before the war started. So is this a way then that, whether it's a conspiracy or not, that this is a way of signaling that there is no future? That if it's to the point where we're sending the people who provide life to the meat grinder, and this is historically why you don't send your women to war, because not only are there tons of other reasons why you should never do it, because the guys get crazier too, because they want to go and rescue them, they break rank, and things can happen, right? And in addition to that, you also have the risk of them being taken hostage and, perhaps being tortured in ways that some men might not give up information in the same ease of way that women might, okay? And I'm sure there's countless other reasons, but primarily is they're the ones who are supposed to be, nurturing the next generation, historically. Now, if we're just saying that even that which is that on that level of sacred, that the women and children first thing is no longer sacred, and you're seeing that with children as well. This was a thing back in, the 1800s, children were viewed as like little people, and they were, sent to work in factories. And so we're almost potentially going back to that in a way. But I jokingly always talk about the movie Starship Troopers and how that neo-fascist form of government is something that is starting to rear its ugly head. And this dehumanization that we're seeing is a telltale sign that we're getting closer to the end. Because if it's gotten so bad that they're willing to put their women on the line, and is this just a bait tactic? Because what's going to happen now, and Israel's trying to do this with the IDF, I don't know what you call them, some people call them barrack bunnies. They don't really typically fight on the front lines, but they hold guns and they get in the BDUs and they do their year of service or whatever it is. And but a lot of them were taken captive, and not all were military. Many civilian females were taken captive as well. But this is a problem. But if you're trying to generate global support for your cause, the optics is great when you have females who've been captured by the other side, right? So is this a way, do they know that this is going to be a catastrophe and that there's going to be an international outcry when we start hearing stories of women being violated on the front lines and, taken hostage, and, videos come out of women being held hostage, which is already happening, of course. Is this a trap to get more men into the fight? But what this is also telling us is that if this is a democracy, I mean, anybody who's looking at this with a clear head, and you see what is happening there, where you can't leave, okay? You're not going to be able to shop. You're not going to be able to get a driver's license. You're not going to be able to get a new subscription to whatever if you defy mobilization orders. And of course, they're picking people up on the street, stuffing them into vans, and now they're going for the women. You don't think that's going to happen here if this is supposed to be the model of democracy that is combating the evil autocrats of the East? So something to think about. That's warning number 2, okay? Warning number 3, Bitcoin. Where do we begin with Bitcoin? I mean, you guys know I'm a gold guy, and I'm not entirely. I have a little exposure to Bitcoin. I'm not going to lie, because I'm also not stupid. I mean, right now it's a speculative thing, but you would be dumb not to have a little bit of exposure, because as much as I think it was put there in order to entrap people as a honeypot of sorts, I do still think that there's probably, at least in the short to midterm, some potential for gains there. I don't have a massive position in it, not by a long shot. I don't even own a full Bitcoin, to be brutally honest. But there's a little bit of exposure there, okay? Now, mysterious origins of Bitcoin. This cannot be overstated. Everybody will try to sweep this under the rug, that the guy who created Bitcoin, Satoshi, who allegedly has 1 million Bitcoin in his possession right now, which would make him among the world's richest right now at the current price of Bitcoin. And this in itself is why it's such a joke. I mean, really, the fact that you don't know where something originated, and now all of a sudden the SEC, which is supposed to be hypercritical of these sorts of things, has approved these ETFs, which basically validates it as a macro asset. So all of a sudden now people are going to start funneling into it, and everybody thinks we're sticking it to the man with this new decentralized thing that the Fed can't touch, just completely overlooking and downplaying and minimizing the fact that we don't know what the origins of this thing were. It was just some mysterious guy who disappeared 14 years ago, all right? Right around the time that the 2008 financial crisis kicked in. Now, if you wanted to take liquidity, if you wanted to take monetary purchasing power away from gold so that you could hoard all the gold, and you knew that the shit was going to hit the fan. And remember, this comes after the Great Recession. So they don't really know what the end result of this quantitative easing is going to be. I actually think that it's ran a lot further than they thought it would, which is why they created Bitcoin, but they have to play it like it's not an establishment thing, right? We got to keep scaring them with the CBDCs. And that's coming too, but I don't trust Bitcoin, not one bit. And I understand the technology, I understand it's decentralized, I understand it's very difficult to shut down, but there's just something about it that there's a lot of things. Even with respect, from an economics point of view, the people who have the Bitcoin right now, which is most of it's been mined, so that means that if, the rest of the world is going to be completely cut out of this asset class, and the ones who already own it and hodl it are going to continue to get rich if it's continually recognized as having value. But the big thing is it diverts capital away from commodities like gold. So if you want to keep the price of gold down, remember, gold is the Mad Max barometer. If gold is going high, that means Mad Max is coming. Gold goes to $5,000 tomorrow, the US had probably collapsed, okay? Because that means the dollar would be worth half as much. There would be riots in the streets, you wouldn't be sleeping very soundly at night, put it that way. So now you even have BlackRock putting up an ETF, a Bitcoin ETF. So something is just not right about the whole situation. And I would exercise restraint, but this is not financial advice. I have a little bit of exposure just for speculation. That's purely it, just to hedge the bets. Because at this day and age, you don't know what they're going to try to confiscate. What we're seeing in Ukraine in terms of this eminent domain shit that they're doing, not only with the resources, but with the people, that's going to happen here. That the War Measures Act is going to be implemented here as well. The first thing, it's going to be censorship, but then there's going to be a crackdown when the war actually starts. And there'll be such a riveting black swan event, that a flashbulb event, that people are going to be helpless in resisting the urge to provide their full, unwavering patriotic support. There's going to be those holdouts, but they're going to bring something. It's going to be women, it's going to be children, it's, the usual stuff, right? So, where should we go next? Those are the 3 warnings, okay? Bitcoin, be mindful of the dehumanization that's coming our way, because what you're seeing in Ukraine, that's the blueprint for the West. And lastly, they always have a plan 6 to 12 months in advance. And our job as trend forecasters is to try and figure out what that plan is based on the data that we currently have. Usually you can do that by going back into the archives. Now, let's talk about, what should we talk? Let's just quickly go over the news. Iran is currently engaged in one of its largest military exercises of the year, and that's the Great Prophet 18. Yesterday, I showed you video footage of dozens of ballistic missiles traveling down a road at night. And I'm always leery when they're doing these things at night, when they're moving stuff at night, because you'd move it under the cover of night if you were going to use it for real. Anyways, big military exercise coming up. What a great time to have a military exercise right around the time that things are about to pop off. And there are no military exercises, only World War III disguises. It's a great way to just cover up your intentions by calling an exercise. This is why whenever a war starts, just like the one did in Ukraine, the Russians will say, we're just having an exercise on the border here. And then look what happens. The Black Sea Memorandum is signed tomorrow by the Bavarian NATO members, Romanian NATO members. NATO littoral partners, as well as NATO's naval groups and non-littoral allies, will be able to participate in Black Sea activities in support of security and interoperability. So the reason why they couldn't bring warships in there like they wanted to, they wanted the British demining ships to come in there. That's just the first. First is going to be demining ships. Then they're going to be bringing some smaller warships in there, and then it's on, right? Because eventually they want to start pushing Russia back into the Black Sea, and this is when things are going to get crazy, when the F-16s come out, and you got these guys saying we're going to start bombing the shit out of Moscow. Guys, I know you think that that I just do this because I'm trying to scare people. I could not make these videos if I didn't actually believe what I say, and I'm telling you that the situation is escalating every single day. It's just happening slow, but from 5 years from now, when you look back at this time, it's going to all make sense. Turkey immediately classified Russia's special military operation against Ukraine as war, which prevented, and in accordance with the Montreux Convention regarding the regime of the Straits, closed the Straits to warships. So you can't send warships through the Bosphorus Strait, which is the main point of access to the Black Sea. I think you can get down through the Danube as well, but I don't think you can send as big of a warship through that river, but I could be mistaken. But there's also restrictions surrounding that. So anyways, this memorandum is supposed to now allow warships into the Black Sea. So this is a huge escalation that we're not hearing about at all. North Korea is being accused of testing its nuclear-capable weapons in Russia. So it was long suspected that the North Koreans were not only providing the Russians with weapons, but also doing so that they could test these weapons out, because eventually, ultimately, they would be used against the South. So if they can get a sense of how they're going to work, why wouldn't you want to do that? NATO has been using Ukraine as a testing ground this entire time. This whole HIMARS thing, getting it all calibrated, and just like the warships in the Red Sea are getting calibrated to what the Houthis can muster, it's all the same. We're testing our gear for when the big one hits. We want to know if it works. And North Korea is trying to get in on that, okay? They want to know, is this shit actually going to work when shit goes down? And this is why the South is so scared. Because now they're seeing, oh, these guys are really now going to be able to dial in their equipment. And the South ain't that far from the North. So any weapon that they've provided that can go 500 kilometers into Ukraine, it will easily cover all of South Korea, from the farthest point of North Korea for that matter. So these are all capable, of course, of carrying nuclear weapons as well. I just have one last thing I wanted to talk about, and this was an analysis that I heard by, I'll just leave the Twitter account unnamed because I don't necessarily agree with everything they say, but I thought this was interesting. This is not my idea. I give credit where it's due, even if it's anonymous. Apparently, they are saying that the Scholz regime has become untenable for the World Economic Forum and the transatlantists. So, we're getting a little into the realm of the whole globalist conspiracy here, but I mean, whatever. It's mainstream enough now that it's within the Overton window, which means it's basically harmless to talk about it. Therefore, the Union of Farmers was instructed to organize a greater protest. This would give people the impression that the power still rests with the people. It will vent some anger and let Scholz's successors do their quiet thing. Now, this person predicts that, Boris Pistorius, the current Minister of Defense, might be the ones who takes the reins. I don't know anything about German politics, so this could be way off the mark, guys. But it's interesting to think about. Because, again, they have a plan, we don't know what it is. And with this whole farming situation, it is a situation in which austerity is coming. Ukraine is demanding more for the war. Germany knows it has to provide it now that it's made mortal enemies with the Russians. And again, so it's between a rock and a hard place. So what they really do need at this point in time is some flashbulb event to justify a war against Russia and to mobilize the country for war, but they got to give people their opportunity to vent and see if they can maybe walk a few of these laws and rules back that they're trying to, in terms of the cutting of subsidies to farmers and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, Pistorius is amongst the most popular, okay, in spite of this guy's very hardline stance against the Russians, okay? And I do believe that there's probably an undercurrent of distrust for the Russians. I mean, there's got to be a historical animosity there, regardless of how much the population has come out of the spell of what happened in World War II. I'm sure that there's resentments there, just like there's resentments all over when countries are defeated and occupied, just like there's longstanding resentment for the Americans by the Japanese that eventually will manifest in some militant form. Both are likely to transform the German economy into a wartime economy. And this is what really needs to happen right now across all of Europe if they want to have a fighting chance of defeating the Russians, whatever that means, in a conventional sense, which is absurd because they have nuclear weapons and they're not going to allow Ukraine, at least not the part of Ukraine that they currently hold, to be taken over by NATO or to be taken back by, it's just not going to happen. They're not going to permit it. They will use nukes before that happens, okay? I'm 100% confident about that. There is a reason why NATO hasn't put fighter jets in there yet. There's a reason why those drones are staying way on the other side of the Black Sea, but they're slowly tiptoeing in. Now, both of these leaders, both Merz, who's the other top candidate, and Pistorius, are deeply entangled with the World Economic Forum, according to this individual. Again, that's why I leave it for last, because it's food for thought. But they both want to prepare for a war with Russia. So we're seeing all of these elections that are going to be taking place this year. This really is going to be a watershed year in every possible way. And it's going to be crazy, man. It already is crazy. But what concerns me deeply at this point in time is the calm that we're currently seeing on the northern border as they prepare for a full-blown war. Remember, when there is silence on the front, there is about to be violence, and it's about to reach a new level of violence because they're planning a bigger move. That's about all I got to say today, and I just hope we can get a break from this stuff at some point, but it doesn't look like there's any letting up, especially not this year. So just keep on prepping, keep on enjoying life to the best of your capability. Get out there. Now that the snow's out, we can actually go and do some of our more ambitious winter projects that we have, and which are going to be testing products, maybe a bit of a Freudian slip there. And we're actually building a new studio, which is going to be quite awesome. And we're about to do some pretty cool podcasts. Got some great guests coming on the channel and all that fun stuff. Stick around tomorrow because we have a very special guest coming on. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Canadian Prepper out.